You guys don't understand. The red is over. It ended 7 days ago. It ended last week. December 1st was the last day of the red. They're starting to print money to control volatility, to suppress the market.
Jack Mallers is about to share a major update on the current state of the market. He believes the major crash is actually over and that the price of Bitcoin is being heavily suppressed and manipulated, something he will explain and break down in this video. He will also discuss what he expects to happen next in 2026. This is an interesting video you won't want to miss.
Here's Bitcoin's price action since 2010 in the yellow. And overlaid is QT and QE. When you overlay this, you get good insights into how Bitcoin reacts to money printing, okay? So look at the velocity in which it enters price discovery during the green. And then what I said on the far right, first of all, look at the monstrous level of QT we've been in, that far right red. That is way longer than the other red. You guys see that? How wide that is relative to the one on the left? And Bitcoin still went up during it. Guys, if we weren't living in fiscal dominance, if the US government wasn't so indebted that it's on the brink of insolvency and it's going to need some form of yield curve control to survive, Bitcoin would be in the gutter. It would still be at 16K. We're living through fiscal dominance. The liquidity came from Treasury. The liquidity came from Janet Yellen. The liquidity is coming from Scott Bessent. You guys don't understand. The red is over. It ended 7 days ago. It ended last week. December 1st was the last day of the red. And now, granted, we haven't started the chapter of green yet. QE, I assume, will come. This type of shit is a mild version of QE. QE is technically on the long end. But nonetheless, they're starting to print money to control volatility, to suppress the market, to create conditions where the US government can continue to borrow. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so for Bitcoin, it's like, to me, I've never been more bullish. The red QT ended. It's over. Rate cuts are coming, are happening. And this isn't me predicting for it or me wishing for it. I mean, this isn't me predicting it. Like, people ask, like, oh, wow, where do you get your macro opinions, man? Were you born that way? Was I born that way? I read the fucking newspaper. This is like what these guys are saying. We ended QT. We are cutting rates. QE is on the table. We have to print money and hand it to the everyday person in order for them to be able to get their eggs and us get reelected. So stimulus checks are coming. If we can't fix housing in the affordability crisis, we won't get reelected. So we're going to give you a 50-year mortgage. I think there will be some form of like yield curve control or like massive levels of like COVID levels of printing in the first half of 2026. Look at this look at this visual, guys. Like, how do you think Bitcoin's going to react to that? It's crazy to me. This is the longest of QT we've ever been in. The most aggressive QT we've ever lived through. And Bitcoin's at $90,000. And by the way, when I say Bitcoin's the only liquidity smoke alarm left, it's the only thing that can tell us the truth. It's the only free market we have. And so when it's chopping around, when it's unable to make new highs, when it starts to chop lower, it's telling us something. There isn't enough liquidity to keep the US from insolvency. There's either a crisis or a big print coming, or both. Now, the other crazy thing about the time we're living through, by the way, what a timeline. I think to myself all the time, how lucky to be born and alive and healthy enough to be contributing to the world today. While Satoshi created Bitcoin, we're living through AI and what seems to be the big print. What other timeline would you rather live through? Never before do you get to live through a new reserve money for our species go from zero to reserve. The thing that, to add context here, is not only does the US government have to choose solvency over inflation, not only are we going to see, in my opinion, some form of yield curve control or excessive levels of printing money to lend to the US government to sustain this system, to prevent bankruptcy. But we have AI, which is making it all worse. Bitcoin in a system with no options left. The hell am I talking about? So here's my macro thesis remains the same, guys. The United States has to print an astronomical amount of money for this to work. And, listen, I'm an American, but we have a global audience here. Bitcoin's global money. Okay? All central banks and all governments have to print an astronomical amount of money to make this work. And so the way I like to think about it is inflation or insolvency, the choice America can't avoid. Okay? And the point of this is I like the metric debt to GDP. Okay? The global debt to GDP is well over 300%. US debt to GDP is well over 100%. What do these numbers mean? Why do I like this metric? Well, here's what debt to GDP tells us. First, it tells us how much debt we're in relative to the amount of GDP is just growth. So it's how much have we borrowed from our future versus how much growth are we producing to pay that back. Because I've made the point before, governments borrowing at the size and scale in which they do, in the currency in which they can print, is the closest thing we've ever seen to time travel as a species. Why? Because, if money is our time and energy in an abstracted form, Elon Musk calls money a labor allocator. You get up, you go to work, you do valuable things for other people, and in return for that, you don't get food, you don't get rent, you don't get vacations, you get money. And you use money to save the value that you just created to later then exchange for the things you want.
Bitcoin is currently seeing a small dip after a period of strong upward movement. The price is hovering around the $90,000 mark, showing a slight decrease over the last day, but it remains at a very high level historically. Investors are watching major financial news closely, especially any announcements about interest rate decisions from central banks, which often cause the crypto market to pause or become volatile. Recent news about more big financial institutions getting involved with Bitcoin investment products continues to provide a foundation of long-term optimism. However, for now, the market is catching its breath, and traders are exercising caution as they await the next big economic signal. Wish someone taught you Bitcoin earlier? Now's your chance to do better for your kids or young family. This teen ebook is perfect. Link in the description.